What is going on, traders? Welcome back to the Clover YouTube Trading Channel. My name is Kyle Williams, and in today's video, we are going to talk about my 5 best and 5 worst trades of 2023. If you're watching this video when it first came out, it's going to be in December 2023, so the year is not over quite yet. I could have a new worst trade of the year or new best trade of the year, but the year has flown by. It is coming to an end, and so I thought I'd share the 5 best and worst trades of the year so far, likely to be the 5 best and worst trades of the year in general. So without further ado, let's jump right in. Let's make it a little more fun. Let's do the first 5 biggest losses first, or worst trades, and then we'll go into some of the best. Now, just because if my P&L is maybe the biggest gain, the biggest loss, doesn't make it number 1. It's not based on necessarily P&L, although I did factor that in. It's more so on just how I traded it, how I felt about it looking back on it months later or weeks later, and kind of just overall reviewing. Now, I will say all of the 5 best trades are some of my biggest wins, and all the 5 worst trades are some of my biggest losses, but they're not in that exact order in terms of P&L, right? So let's jump in. The first, number 5, right? Number 5, the worst loss of the year for me was PACW. Now, this was a regional bank stock. These stocks were kind of getting crushed in the beginning of the year, specifically March and April and May. You know, with interest rates rising, a lot of these regional banks were under some pressure, hence PACW being one of them. And so the specific trade on PACW here that I took was on May 3rd through 5th, which was literally the day before it crashed, then gapped down, and then immediately gapped back up and bounced. In fact, that was the actual low, right? May 4th was the actual low that this has ever traded. It has actually not gone lower ever since. Now, granted, they could go lower, who knows? I don't really know about how well the company's doing now, but during this period, there was severe panic, right? FRC, First Republic Bank, just went down, kind of went out of business, and so PACW was, from a lot of people, looking like that next best thing, and so I was short biased. So if we go into my trades here, yes, we have a lot of them. We got a lot of screenshots to go through, the actual trades I took. PACW, unfortunately, for some reason, don't have the actual screenshot of the trade that I took it, but I definitely entered in either late day on this day or in after hours as it was fading off, right? It closed right around $6. It ended up closing after hours around into the 3s. I think I started getting into the short into the 4s. It was a little bit late to the party, but again, I was so willing to chase because if you saw how FRC traded, that thing collapsed, to like a buck, right? It was essentially going bankrupt. They were going bust. And so I thought if PACW was going to follow the same thing, I didn't really mind chasing. So unfortunately, I don't have the actual entry here, but you do see me covering some right away, realizing that something, I think either news came out or some kind of sentiment came out, and realizing that it really wasn't as bad as FRC was. I kind of realized, I should be covering it. So you do see me covering here as early as I can pre-market. Ultimately, I then saw it spiking, and I thought, okay, well, if it's going to spike at a better price, let's try to get short for the actual, more pullback. And so I took a loss here, took another loss there, another one there, another attempt there, and then one last attempt here. So pretty much what is 5 or 6 attempts after the fact. I already took my biggest, biggest loss attempt on the overnight short. So I think I lost $8 grand on this one, and between these other 5 attempts, another $8 to $9 grand on this one. Ultimately, over this entire trade, I did lose 17 grand. So again, not the biggest loss in the world. That's why it is number 5. But just how I felt about it, looking back on it, I was so, I had so much recency bias with the recent FRC kind of collapse that I just got super, super aggressive with PACW, ultimately not really thinking about the fact of how better of a situation they were in. Now, granted, I did ultimately realize that, which is why I covered here. I could have just been stubborn and let this original position not being covered and just taken all the way higher. It would have been a much bigger loss. So I am glad I cut this, but then giving enough much more tries here after I kind of already knew they weren't going to fall apart like FRC did, that's why I look back on this and say, this really wasn't a great loss to take. So there's that one. Next up, we have Tesla. Now, Tesla reason being is because it's just not a stock I normally like to trade. It doesn't look like much on this daily chart here, but it was really into this run from, start of the year, it was just ever so slightly tapped 100. And before you know it, in less than a month or two, it's now pushing up 100% into $200. Now, looking in hindsight, this was a very choppy daily chart, right? There's not much smooth action. I mean, maybe this day right here was a little smooth red day, but really I got chopped up in this action here, kind of thinking 200 was going to be a resistance level, which in some case it was, but it did end up breaking over multiple times. And so for me, I took a pretty rough loss very quickly on this in a matter of a morning, like the first hour. If we look into the intraday trades here, this beautiful puppy right here. So gapping down, not even at 200, right? But it's gapping down in the high 180s. I'm thinking again, 200 should be that resistance level. And what do you know? I start getting short and right out the open to this huge spike. I then add some more. And again, this whole time I'm adding, I'm essentially I'm not moving my wrist down. Like I'm still keeping it at 200, and the strength is just way more than I thought it was. Like I almost didn't even think it should get to 200, again, me naively thinking that. And so by the time it just held super beautifully and then spiked even higher, I didn't even let it get to 200. I said to myself, you know, this is way too strong. I'm way too big a size. I would be taking a well over 20 grand loss. If it got to 200, I'm clearly dead wrong. I need to get out. So I do cover it in like the 196, 97 area. I do then try to short again late day after I thought this failure midday was like, okay, I shouldn't have probably covered it here. It's finally faded over like I thought. Let's reshort. Reshorted it, very small size. Good news came out. I forget what it was, but something good, positive about the company came out. And so I then covered that short there for another small loss already at top. You know, the majority, 90% of the loss was this morning action, ultimately losing another 17 grand on this one. So looking back on it, it's just not a stock I should have traded, right? If you know how I like to trade, I love trading smaller price stocks. Tesla is not one of those, right? One of the largest companies in the market, just should not have been really on my radar, no matter how extended I thought it was. Even if it did go from 100 to 200, it's just not how it trades, how it moves. Everything about it was not worth me taking a loss of this magnitude on it. So there's that. No, loss number three. I think everyone's going to recognize and familiar with this one, which is TOP. And you know exactly what day I'm talking about. It is typically this day going into this huge day. Now, my biggest loss on this, actually of the year really, was on this day. You can't even see it because it's so extended, but it went from 7 to like 21, 22-ish, right? And then that led to this massive squeeze in after hours, which ultimately is the reason why this opened up at even the 60s, but actually tapped as high as 240, which it looks insane in regular market hours, but it actually tapped 200s in after hours as well. So it just made a secondary move twice. And so if we look at that intraday, you can't even see, again, it's so hard, it's just so funny to look at because you barely can't even see any of the action here because just how insane the after hours action got. I actually took some long here, realizing how much of a squeeze this could have been. Now, granted, in hindsight, it would have been lovely if I just held this long here all the way up to hundreds of dollars of shares higher, all the way up to 225 or 260, I should say. Insane volatility. It's not every day you see something like this. In fact, this is in many, many ways a huge black swan, but this was my biggest loss of the year. I did lose $105,000 on this trade. The reason why it is actually not my top loss though, is because one, I'm incredibly grateful I cut, right? If there's any trade to show an example of why cutting your losses is important, it is insanely important and huge critical for me that I cut it, my short trades right here on these green candles, right? Because had I not, and I just held, well, I covered these at like 18, 19, I think like 17 at the best. Okay, it closed around 20 and it's up over 10x in after hours. Just a few more hours, I could have been down 1,000% on my short. Okay, forget 105 grand. It would have been over $1 million loss. So this cut was one of the best things I ever did. And I kind of knew in the moment I had to do it. There was no ifs, ands, or buts for me about holding after hours. I knew that was the wrong decision, you know, at all costs. And so I'm so glad I cut it, which is why it's not the worst loss. It's just by the fact that it is my biggest loss of the year. I put it at number 3. And more importantly, it just sounds really crazy to say, but I actually went into this day willing to risk that much in this trade. And that got me to reevaluate my risk management in general. I said, you know what, just because I can lose 100 grand doesn't mean I should. And so I moved it down to 50 right after this as like a max stop idea. But again, still too much, still like my biggest loss on the year, but nonetheless, one of my best cutting losses on the year as well, because it could have been way, way worse. So again, that's number 3. Number 4 here, we have RETO. This one was, you know, similar to top, was a Chinese kind of sketchy pump and dump. This one particularly is actually 2 losses, 2 huge losses that resulted in me losing 75 grand on this one, 2 losses combined. One was being on this day here, and the other day on this huge gap up here. Ultimately, an incredibly choppy ticker. The manipulation and kind of the algos, if you want to call it, the promoters behind it were just really, really good at what they do. And I got caught. You know, I got caught twice. I think it was one for like 30K, another one for like 40K. And so if we look at the trades here, this day, and I've talked about this on previous videos, this one was actually this day, right? Which is on the 15th of August when it had this huge wick up and down. You know, got short in the morning, covered for a loss, got short again, covered a little bit for the halt, but I had most of my size in the halt. And what do you know? They halted up nearly 100%, guys. It literally halted around 350. And at one point it was, at the high, when it opened up, it was indicating 6. Now, granted, it immediately halted down, which is where I ended up getting my fills. So it saved me about 50 cents of slippage. But nonetheless, it was still, I was risking like the day high at like $4 or red green at $4. So I'm still taking almost $1.50 more of slippage, hence why I lost over 30 grand on this trade. And beyond just the money, it was just a very scary situation, right? It was one of those situations where, what I thought was going to be a cut at 4, I saw them indicating it up during the halt at 450, then 5, then 550, then 6. And it was one of those things where, how high will they take this? What was stopping them from opening in at 7, at 8, at 9, at 10? and I have just nothing to do. No, there's no stop loss that can help me. There's no max stop loss that can help me. In a halt like this, that's why they're super scary. And I've always looked at halts so differently ever after this point, because it just brings this level of risk that you literally have no control over. And so that is why it is my number 2 worst loss on the year. Again, not in terms of P&L, but because of how scary this could have been, because of how much risk I actually ended up taking. That's why this is number 2. It's just very, very scary. And again, I talk about this just as much detail in the previous monthly recaps where I talk about this trade and a video lesson for 4-leaf Clover subscribers. So I've gone over this trade plenty enough times. It is very, very scary. But again, that was only half the loss, right? The other half was on this day, like I said, on the 4th. I think I swung it a little bit into the 9th and 10th until it started uptrending again, unfortunately. But the first time, right, I got short, thinking they were gonna fade it off. Huge spike, right? Tons of slippage, covered some. Shorted again, covered again. And then I started just kind of slowly scaling in, holding it overnight. What led to the next day was what I thought was gonna happen, which was a full-on panic. Unfortunately, I add a lot to that initial scale-in from yesterday. And what do you know, creators looking at these in hindsight, because these are just absolutely awful. Ended up covering that right into red-green here, unfortunately being the top, but I had to protect myself. Reshorted again, covered some more again, and then I had like, I don't know, a couple thousand shares at the end of this. I just kept a swing on just in case. And what do you know, it started uptrending, so I covered the rest there. So that was the 40 grand loss, pretty much 20 grand on that one day, 20 grand on this huge wick day, and then the other 30 grand on that huge halt up day. So both to combine together was 75K. Again, very unnecessary. There's a lot of more risk on the table than I really ever needed. Even when this dumped, I didn't make even nearly as much back to make back the loss, which is okay. I've talked about it. I can go on and on about this trade, how just scary it was. But yeah, you get the idea. And that's why it's number 2. Number 1, the worst loss for me when I look back on my year was I did lose $57,000 on CVNA. And the reason why, it's more so than just the $50,000, because the $57,000 was just the icing on the cake, guys. I had lost probably another 50 grand on this ticker alone in multiple attempts leading up to this day. And the reason being is because I just got so consumed with CVNA doing an offering because they needed money. The reality is they also were doing incredibly well with their business, and so it kind of offset that. And so I got just caught off guard so brutally on something like this, but I actually had it long. I talk about this when I review this trade. I had it long from the 12s and ended up selling in 15, and then watched it go all the way up into the 20s, 30s, and 40s without my set long. And so I think that was the reason why I just immediately switched to short bias, knowing that they were going to need to do an offering. And what ultimately happened is, yeah, they did an offering, but they did an offering right around earnings, and their earnings were great. And so it completely, X'd the offering out. I held it overnight like an idiot. I've talked about this again before. I was so stupid and dumb holding it short into earnings, thinking that the offering was going to just exit out. Versus, again, I thought the offering was going to exit out the earnings. And turns out the earnings exit out the offering. And so again, if we go into the trades here, this was one of the first days here I started getting short for the swing idea. Again, holding it overnight. Okay, just nothing crazy, little bit of a failure. Thought it was going to fade lower into the low 30s. But then we go into the next day, and the next day I cover my short, right? I cover it up here for a loss. But then in after hours, they say, hey, we're going to release our earnings more early. They were supposed to release their earnings, I think, in a few days or a week or so. And they said, no, we want to expedite it quickly. We want to send out our earnings the very next day in pre-market. And everyone kind of knew it was because they wanted to do an offering. They couldn't really do an offering until they put out earnings. And so that was what they wanted to They wanted to speed it up. And so I thought, oh my gosh, that's so bearish. They're going to crush this stock. And what do you know? I started getting short. Now, again, this is why it's stupid, because I'm getting short literally into earnings. Very next day, what happens? We gap up huge. They put out the earnings, blow out earnings, very, very good for the business. Again, they announced the offering, but it doesn't matter at this point, right? I cover on once it starts bouncing back, I start reshorting. And again, this is where just revenge trading takes its toll. My revenge trading completely takes over. I can't even tell how many attempts I gave this thing here. It looks like I gave it like 7 more attempts at least. If I just left it alone here, would have been like a 25, 30K loss, but I actually ended up doubling it, even more so, just revenge trading. And again, I hit $57,000 max stop, or 50K after slippage and fees. I think one last attempt, it just got me. And yeah, I cut myself off. That's why you then see no more trades of the day. I said, yep, we're done. Like, that's it. Rule's been extremely broken. I remember wiring out after this and feeling a lot better after it. But even to this day, I have still not touched CVNA. Since that day, it had a great red day. The next day that you could, quote unquote, could have made some money back for myself, but I have not touched it ever since, and I don't plan to. But just by far, and this is why it's number 1, because the taste of my mouth and the remembrance I have of this trade, the entire month of July, and most of June. Just really was not happy about handling this at all. I really wish I just either hadn't traded at all or just kept my long. I mean, my gosh, holding it from 12 and just not even at the top at 50, just holding it into the 30s or 40. I mean, would have been an insane win. So yeah, that is why it is, my number one, I guess, worst loss or worst trade, I should say, of 2023. Now, on to the 5 best trades of the year. We've gone through all the biggest and worst losers. Let's go on to the 5 best trades of the year. And again, some of these trades that I'm going to go over are really the underlying significant portion of my year, of why my year has been so good. Again, at the time I'm up over $800,000 in the year. Most of these top 5 trades are at least half or more of my year. So the most recent, this actually happened literally last week, SHOT. SHOT was an amazing run from the low ones all the way as high as 750. This company had put out or had paid a lot of social media accounts with big followings to promote their product, a lot of Google ads, etc. Just a lot of hype around their up and coming product, right? So it had a huge run. Amazing, multiple kind of upwards move. And the reality is they had a bunch of warrants from $1. They still do. I think that was their agenda the entire time, which is to get as high as possible, get as much volume in as possible, to be able to have liquidity to sell those warrants into. And so that's exactly, I think, what they did, right? If we look at the trades here, number one here, I took a small loss, and this is on top day. So this particular day is when it, went from low to mid 4s all the way up to 750. Up the morning, I thought it might have a red day. I thought it might fail. So you do see me take 2 losses here. You do see me trying to take another loss as it went it's not a great parabolic. It's pretty choppy, actually. I just thought because it was so overdone, not only on the intraday, but also on the daily, that eventually we were going to pull back to at least $6 by the end of the day. Unfortunately, we had, it was choppy. It had one more big move up to 7, and then finally kind of crashed where I thought it would. Again, unfortunately, you see no arrows here. I missed this complete move, but once it crashed so hard, how much harder than I expected. Again, I thought it was going to go to 6. By the time this whole move happened with this big of selling volume, I thought to myself, you know what? They might be using the warrants. I had no proof or anything to suspect that they were using the warrants on the way up, on the front side, but by how just ugly and harsh this selling was when I was watching it in the moment, I was like, this might be their warrants. And so you do see me here. I do end up putting on a swing short idea. I did want to get short overnight, especially dying so much, and it worked right away, quickly, right into the close, and pulled another, $1 plus a share. And so then I took it overnight. Let's look at the next day. The next day here, same idea, ended up gapping up because again, if you look at something that's so oversold, especially on a daily chart like this, right? Something that has a huge wick to the downside, it's due for a bounce, no matter how overextended it still is. Again, no stocks go straight up, no stocks go straight down. So there was kind of inefficiency for a potential bounce. That's why you see in pre-market it actually did bounce from, the previous close of 477, 476 or whatever it was. Ended up opening, at the mid 5s to high 5s. Ended up spiking right into 6, which was kind of the former resistance level from yesterday, if you go back on that intraday chart, and then just faded. And again, I had this particular trade as a swing idea, but when it went so low, below sub 3 within a day, just absolutely getting crushed. Again, looking at the daily chart here, just a huge red day. I did not expect this big of a move. The fact that it happened, I was like, you know what? I need to take this. I don't think this is gonna, go much lower anytime soon. It might actually bounce, and so far we have. And so I just covered. I literally just covered it. I made like 30 grand here. I took, again, this is similar to RETO. I took 2 different trades. This here was a day trade version of it. Took very small size pre-market here, then took, over half, if not the bulk of my size out in the market open into the $6 range. And then what do you know? I started covering proactively because again, I had thought, like I said, I did not expect it to fade so much. I thought if I was going to day trade it, it was going to go to maybe $4, maybe high 3s at best, and then it was going to bounce, which is why you see me get all out right here. Again, in hindsight, I was covering very early, ended up going a whole $1 plus a share lower, but thankfully the patience on my swing trade allowed me to make some more extra money there. But I did make over 20 grand on this trade as well. So putting the two together, I did make about $53,000. Awesome win. Again, over 2 trades. But again, when you look at a daily chart like this, this is my A+ looking kind of chart. It is the most recent, so it is number 5. And yeah, just really great trade. I expect this to probably be back to $1 in who knows how long, but sooner rather than later, let's put it that way. So number 4 is going to be, number 4 best trade of the year is going to be BBBYQ. Now, you see that all the chart here, it's red. It's not halted, it's just no longer a stock. Like BBBYQ, if you followed the story, they went bankrupt and now they're no longer in business. They're done. They are not a tradable stock anymore. They are gone.
Reduced to atoms.
In history. And so the particular day that I made $70,000 on this trade, or over multiple trades, it ended up being a swing trade, was on this move, right? We went from, 150s all the way up to as high as nearly 6, and I shorted on this first red day. Now, if we look in the intraday here, let's pull it up. Let's get rid of SHOT. BBBY was getting short pre-market, ended up downsizing some, thinking it was going to go green when it didn't. I reshorted out the open. It holds green perfectly. Do cover some, and then reshort into that bounce, cover some more late day. Again, ended up being a beautiful fade, right? The previous close was like 520s, ended up going down sub 4, even to the mid 3s. So beautiful, beautiful, harsh red day. Now, I was thinking it was going to go sub 3 the next day. I said, this is such a good short. They're going to go bankrupt. This thing should be sub 3 by tomorrow. Now, if you look how that work turned out, it didn't. It went as low as 335 the next day and then bounced. I didn't cover a single share on this day. I was so convicted. I said, you know what? It's going to be sub 3 eventually. I am not going to cover a single share. Well, what do you know? The next day, if you see on the daily chart there, it is going much higher, right? It ends up actually tapping to the high or mid to high 4s. And then from having so convicted, my emotions get escalated. And I'm like, oh my gosh, this is really going to come back. I should be covering. Once I cover some, my tiltedness and my emotions kind of go away. And I say, you know what? They just did that. I'm not the only one who just covered. This thing's still going to die. I need to reshort. So you did see me reshort here, holding it overnight. And what do you know? I then do swing it for a few more days. Again, this was the day here. I do swing it overnight for a few more days until it gets sub 3 like my original plan and goal. I end up covering it on this day on that sub 3 move for $70,000 once it's all combined, said and done. So, looking at the intraday or the daily, actual trade, right? You see me cover that swing over. And again, didn't touch it at all. Didn't just let my swing on these last 2 days. Still tried to keep that conviction. And what do you know? It worked out. So in hindsight, this is why it's number 4. Even though $72,000 is one of my bigger wins on the year, the reality is why it's number 4 is because I did get too greedy too soon for not covering any. I would have traded so much better had I covered some here, and then actually, because I covered some, been able to reshort here versus having to reshort my entire position of what I covered. It would have ended up being a much, much bigger gain, but I'm not going to complain about $72,000. Still a great, great win nonetheless. It just probably could have been closer to 100 had I played it a little bit better, right? So that's why it's number 4. All right, number 3, number 3rd best trade of the year is HCNWF. This was I would say a classic pump kind of runner, a pump and dump, but also somewhat of a runner aspect, very similar to SHOT actually. Not much trading history. Immediately started out the open. Again, had Google ads, I believe, had a kind of hype promoting around it, and we had a beautiful run from 50 cents all the way up to 450. Almost a 10x in a matter of 5 days. Great volatility. Had a huge parabolic move on this day, which is where I then started getting short. And then the next day, the bars were very hard to find, but I did find some. It took quite a while, but finally it fell over apart and it faded. And then I swung it pretty over the next few days down to, I believe, the mid to low ones. I'm covering for $52,000. So made $52,000 on this trade. Here is the actual intraday of that blow off move. Amazing parabolic. I did take, a small paper cut on the way up, got most of my size up here. This ad here is so bad, guys. Luckily it was a very small portion of it. It's funny, I'll play this game with myself where it's like, if I want something to bounce, I might just short just a little bit, and there's no rhyme or reason, but it's like, that's kind of what this was. I was like, you know what? I want this thing to bounce. Let's just short a very small piece. And what do you know? It was like right near the bottom and the bounce actually happened. Shorted some more here, shorted some more into the close, had a decent amount of size overnight thinking this was the top, but still wanted to add more. So you do see the next day, I do end up adding and finding more shares. Unfortunately, not as many shares as I would want, but a good amount. So I do short the morning spike, gives you one more push right into resistance from previous day, right into $4, right? Tops out right at that $4 area, chops around for a very long time, much longer than I thought. But finally midday, you get your first sign of weakness, right to red, green, a little more chop, and then late day, it just falls apart, right? Going from, again, $4 at the high. I started covering pieces at 2 near the low. So a full 50% pullback in one single day. So I do cover some, then cover the rest over the next few days as it kind of traded lower. Again, covered some into the 150s and the rest in the 140s here, and I made $52,000. So great win, great fade from that first red day all the way down to the low to mid 2s, or mid 1s, I should say. And what do you know, months later, as the year ends, we're down at 16 cents. So quite the fade. Very awesome trade. I look back on this, and I was risking a lot, right? Had this actually broke out over the highs at 450, it would have been a bigger loser, and maybe it would have been on one of my 5 worst trades. But again, I wouldn't have been a worse trade because I genuinely was willing to risk that much, thinking how ideal A+ of a trade this was, and it worked out beautifully. So a 50K winner there. Now, number 2, LHDXQ. Now, I traded this when it was LHDX, and even now, I think very similar to BBBYQ, it is no longer a stock, it is gone. Again, that's why it is red. But this trade, I put it on my number 2 because when I look back on this, it was one of the easier trades I could have ever taken. And the reason why I say that is because I don't want to say obviousness of it, but essentially what happened is they put out some news about some product they had, so it gapped up. Then it squeezed higher. But what a lot of people didn't really want to acknowledge, at least the crowd or whoever was chasing this or buying this up, was that they were pretty much declared bankruptcy. They declared bankruptcy and it was going up. Not only that, but they also declared their delisting. They were like, we are going to delist in a matter of days. So for me, when this thing was above $1, I was like they're going to delist. Like when you, and for me, seeing many tickers go delist to the OTC market, I mean, they're not worth dollars, they're worth pennies. And so here's this thing at $1. I'm like, this thing should be under 20 cents very quickly. And so that's what I did. I immediately started getting short on this top day. LHDX here, I ended up getting short on that day where it tapped 140. I did take some small paper cuts. Not small paper, I think actually pretty decent sized losses because being so aggressive. But luckily I did avoid the squeeze once it failed. I'm trying to short one more time. Again, I thought it was gonna come back. But once it failed under VWAP right here, this kind of candle, that kind of gave me enough confirmation that like, hey, this is gonna die, this is gonna fade. So you do see me getting that size back on. Do swing it overnight. Great close red on the day. This is what you see here. Right, this red candle. Swung it overnight again, much more fade. And then on the day that it was going to delist, I decided to cover the rest. I didn't really care to actually hold it over into the OTC market. Frankly, because there was a chance it might not actually go to the OTC, but it usually does, and it did. But when we're down at 50 in the 40s, and I thought, it gave me a really great fade, and I was looking for 20s, and we're already at the 40s. Like, do I really want to hold for 20 more cents after I just got a $1 plus move? Not $1 plus, but like 60, 80 cent move in a matter of 2 to 3 days. I said, nope, let's take it. And so that's why you do see this trade where I do cover it. Unfortunately, I did cover into strength I don't love. I would have liked to have gotten most of my covers down at the lower end here. But nonetheless, I did lock in, 56 grand in this one. So really, really great trade. And again, I look back on this and feel really, really good because it was one of those trades where, again, I don't want to say it was obvious, but it was just such a good inefficiency where here's the stock going bankrupt and going to delist, and it is going up. It is going up hundreds of percent. So it was a beautiful, beautiful, inefficiency, mispricing, and I took advantage, right? Made over 50K on that one. So that was great. And now finally, the best for last, number one, the best trade on the year for me, not only because it's my biggest gain, but because of just how I think I traded it. And honestly, a little bit of luck involved, frankly, was VENG. This is a classic, I don't want to call it Wolf of Wall Street pump and dump, but an OTC pump and dump, very classic to what we saw many, many times back in the early 2000s and also 2012, 13, 14, 15. I unfortunately didn't get traded during that time, but I look back on charts when I was first trying to become profitable, and a lot of these happened. Surprisingly, they still happen to some degree today at a very much lower and minor scale than they do back then, but nonetheless, this was one of the most recent ones. Beautiful, beautiful run from, it actually did a reverse split. This did not go to 130. I think this was as high as like 20s, 25, 26, 27-ish, maybe 30. I don't quite remember, but I think this run actually started from 2. But anyways, multiple waves of pumping and dumping. Unfortunately, I did get short, into this run, and then once it started grinding back, I actually ended up covering my short position for a loss and ended up missing this pullback, which sucks. I mean, I remember being super pissed at myself for covering because there was no reason really for me to cover other than the fact that I was scared that it was going to come back, which again is not part of the plan. And so I missed this purse pull. That part was the most frustrating. But because it had died and we'd gotten back into the previous highs under, I think this was $20 at the time, I thought to myself, and also huge, huge volume. I had suspicions that this was going to end soon. At some point, they can go on for a very long time, but once they're done, they're kind of done. So I do end up getting short into this bounce move, especially adding once we started fading off. And then once, I think it was, again, this is where the luck comes in. I think it was either this day or this day, I went full size, risking this bounce high. Very aggressive because again, any one of these bounce highs like previously could have just broken out and gone higher. But what I just mentioned, it eventually dies. And I thought this move here was the beginning of that. I do get short full size, risking this bounce high. And what do you know, the very next night, I should say, it had the CE. Now the CE, for those who don't understand, it means caveat emptor, which means buyer beware. It is one of the worst symbols a stock can get, ultimately leading to most of these stocks gapping down huge and then selling off huge. Hence why you do see it, gap down big down to, I think at the time this was like $5 and then selling off all the way down to $1. And again, if we look at the trades here, I was swinging it for a very long time because I don't actually have the actual intraday trades. I was able to actually short a very small piece. I was able to add on this. It was like, I don't know, a couple hundred shares. Believe me, it didn't make much of a difference. Most of my size, in fact, 98% of my size was right here. Right? Again, just a beautiful, beautiful win. Actually, you can see here. So the high was 26. Got short in like the 12, 13 area. Ended up covering it all near $1 and $2. Made 156 grand. Guys, so huge win. I think it's my only, actually one of 2 100K wins on the year, but by far my biggest win, not even close. And yeah, super awesome. By far my best trade of the year, hands down. Not only because I finally timed it well after, missing this big dump, but I got lucky, right? Some of my best trades, there's luck involved, and it got the CE overnight, giving me a quick and easy win right back to $1. Made the game much bigger than I originally anticipated. So that is all of them, guys. So that is the top 5 best and 5 worst trades on the year. Hopefully you guys learned something about, maybe some of the mistakes that I commonly made, about what made some of those worst trades worse, what made some of my best trades better. Nonetheless, it's been an awesome year that 2023 has offered. I hope 2023 is just as similar, if not slightly better. You never know what we're going to get. Maybe by the end of 2024, we'll do the same video like this, and we'll give you the next 5 best and 5 worst trades for that year as well. So thanks for watching so much, guys. Make sure to like and subscribe, and we will see you all in the next video. Peace.